I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
I'm not even supposed to be here today! Oh, fuck you!
Come on, you want me to drive? You're supposed to be suicidal. Remember, I'll
Anybody
drive.
a drive?
Get in the car.
Fuck me in the ass. Fuck you, you fucking stupid cunt.
You know, this was a bad movie, but oddly enough as well, it didn't end up being among the top 4 or 5 like I had feared it probably would be. You know, I still hated this movie, but let's just say there were also some things I didn't mind, but it's still somewhat of a rant. Because I'll get to the reaction later, but it's Donji Corleone here, and I'm here with a brand new rant, and this rant is going to be for a film I was never excited to see, Eddington. Yeah, Ari Aster's new film, back with yet another film. What is the plot of this? Well, this was one of the reasons I was not excited to watch this, because this is set during May 2020, a year nobody wants to remember. It's a standoff between a small-town sheriff, played by Joaquin Phoenix, and a mayor, played by Pedro Pascal, who I am tired of seeing this guy in almost every damn film. Acting-wise, I liked him in The Mandalorian. Not a big fan of him in real life because of all the stupid stuff he says online. But yeah, and I'm not surprised he'd star in a film like this, especially with how his character in this movie was. It sparks a power gig as neighbors pitted against neighbor in Eddington, New Mexico. Yeah, so as for my reaction, you guys know my thoughts on Ari Aster as a director. The only movie he got lucky with, the only movie I've liked from him, was Hereditary. Ever since then, I've not been a fan of anything else he has done. He's directed Midsummer, which was a mediocre film about as soon as they see this person die, these two morons decide to argue over who's doing whose assignment instead of get out and leave, and they all get themselves killed by their own stupidity. And then, before doing 2 years before this, he directed Beau is Afraid. The less said about that movie, the better. And then, last year he produced a film I had not watched called Sasquatch Sunset, but I've heard it's god-awful. And how else could Ari Aster's about to be stooped lower? Well, make a Western that shouldn't really be called a Western, because this did not even feel Western at all, set during fucking 2020. As soon as I heard that concept, and as soon as I saw the trailers for this, I could already smell a bomb. This looked awful. Well, but I did it for a benefits watch, and how was it? Was it among the top 3? No. Was it an awful movie, though? Yes. But it didn't piss me off as, let's say, Snow White, or The Woman in the Yard, or Minecraft, which, ironically, I thought those, or even Electric Stink, which I thought were worse movies than this. Because this did have, and this is definitely an improvement over Beau is Afraid, but that's not saying much. And because there were, despite being a COVID film, there were some decent things about this. Ironically, sounds weird for me to say that, but there were some things I did not mind. Some bit of the finale I thought was kind of cool. The first half actually did kind of start off a little more promising, like maybe this would end up being a surprise, but then the middle act happens, and that's when all the shit stuff happens. But how was this made? Well, Ari Aster had wrote a script for a Western film they at one point considered making was going to be his directional debut. He was going to make it for about 5 years, but he went on and made Hereditary Midsummer first, and when he promoted Boredom is Afraid with the penis monster, Aster indicated his next film would be this Western, and he updated it to take place during COVID. Smart choice. And in January 2023, Emma Stone and Christopher Abbott got attached to star. Then Aster wanted to collaborate with Joaquin Phoenix again for this film. So Aster and Phoenix scouted New Mexico shooting locations in August 2023. And then in March 2024, some more cast members were added. And Austin Butler ended up taking over Christopher Abbott's role. And it got produced by Square Peg in A24, and who financed the film with IPRBC. And the filming took place from March through May last year in Albuquerque, and Truth or Consequences in New Mexico. Then, after the film was shot and, well, advertised, it had its world premiere at the main competition at the Cannes Film Festival on May 16, 2025, 2 months ago, and was released in theaters by A24 this weekend on July 18, 2025, to polarized reactions from audiences and critics. Not surprised. Now, let's get on with the bad qualities of the film. The bad qualities with this movie, Eddington really falters under the old ambition, like the overstuffed narrative and the themes that range from all the polarization and the activism and all the coherence necessary to deliver the message. It does not do that at all effectively. And Ari Aster really critiques the far right and the performative left, and the film's satire does veer to cynicism. It offers little in the way of nuanced commentary, and the pacing suffers as well because this film is 149 minutes long. There's times it suffers, but there's times when, despite the suffered pacing, the film does feel a little bit quicker. I mean, this movie did feel a little more faster than Midsummer, and especially was faster than Beau's Afraid. That is something. Like, despite being 149 minutes long, like, there's sequences though that do drag, and the moments that seem really indulgent, and the total shifts from, like, either dark comedy, like this film does say it's dark comedy, but I didn't laugh in this film. There wasn't really anything. There was, like, only one funny scene. There was only one funny line. Nothing else was funny or tries to be all horror, or tries to be all political allegory, and leaves the audience disoriented and not really enlightened. Like, Ari Aster is a kind of guy that just likes making films for his own reasons, and not really for a clear audience. Like, this thing is, the point is, like, who wants to relive the nightmare of 2020? Nobody. Nobody wants to relive that year. Like, every time they've made a film about 2020, they always bomb. Songbird, produced by Michael Bay, that bombed. That didn't go to theaters because the theaters were closed the year that came out. But it went to streaming. It still bombed on streaming. I don't know anybody who even watched it. There was this horror film from January 2023 called Sick. Like, I don't know anybody that watched that movie. Like, the thing is, these types of films never work. And if they never work, and if they have never gotten attracted audiences, how about stop making them in the first place? Then, if I want if I want a good film about a virus outbreak, I will watch a 1995 film from the late Wolfgang Petersen, may he rest in peace, called Outbreak. That was actually a good movie because that had good characters. That had some good suspense. That had good writing and good direction from the late Wolfgang Petersen. And it was a well thought out plan with that movie. And that movie was only 128 minutes long and not 150 minutes like this. So how do we start off Eddington? Well, it's late May of 2020, and for a while though, at first, like, I was almost subverted for a sec, because this first half did start off started off a little bit promising. You see the fictional town of Eddington in New Mexico, and you all know, because it's May 2020, the town's under lockdown, and there's there's already a mask mandate that's imposed by Pedro Pascal's character, Ted Garcia, and he's planning a re-election. Our actual protagonist, though, Joaquin Phoenix's character, Joe Cross, the sheriff of the town, he obviously doesn't like the mandate. These two cops approach him, and they tell him to put it on because of the mandate, but he doesn't want to, but he secretly puts it on, but once they're out of sight, he takes it off. And he thinks it's robbing the individuals of their freedom, those who struggle to, especially like those who struggle to breathe while wearing it. And he sees like, and I'll get to like the whole bar stuff later, like how the movie does start. This random homeless guy actually wanders into the town, muttering stuff to himself. And you see that Joe lives with his wife, Emma Stone's character named Louise, who makes homemade dolls, and her mother Dawn. And now when it comes to the lead character, Joe, like I will admit, is he a perfect lead character? No. But he actually has some pretty decent, likable qualities about him. Actually, like, unlike the trailers made it look like he'd probably be an asshole victim, but surprisingly, like, he actually starts off as a pretty decent fellow. Because the thing is, like, he actually does seem like he does treat Louise very well because he does buy her flowers, and he is pretty nice to his in-law. And in the next scene when he's at a store, and there's this literally old guy that's being denied entry there because he has no mask on, but the guy says he has a breathing disability, and like Joe even Joe feels bad for the guy right there. And like the worst thing is, like, some of these people don't even act sympathetic to him, because once he gets removed from the store, they clap. Like, what's wrong? Like, they just literally clap that the guy got denied his stuff. Like, wow. And like, heck, even Pascal's character Ted doesn't even have any sympathy over that either. Barely seems to act all sympathetic, and then Joe actually, one of his likable qualities here is he actually ends up buying the old guy his groceries, which I did like that moment, and I can definitely see where Joe is kind of coming from with that, and I can honestly see why he does not like Pedro Pascal's character, because like when we see his character, this guy honestly comes off worse. I know, like, Joe does some evil stuff in the later half, but honestly, Pascal's character doesn't come off as any better. Because when you first meet this guy, he basically has used a bar in his opening scene for his own debate with two people, treats his son like shit, and doesn't even try to remember his ex-wife's birthday, and when his son reminds him about that, he doesn't give a shit about it. And when his son, like, goes see a friend and promises he's going a distance, he still gets mad over it. Like, seriously, like this guy doesn't really come off as any better. This guy honestly comes off as worse. Like, this was a character, like, as soon as you meet this character, I already can't wait. I honestly hoping this character would get his comeuppance. Because this guy just came off as an asshole. Really, doesn't seem like he really cares about the town. Even Joe seems to care more about the townspeople than this guy does. So, eventually Joe decides to try to restore the people's freedom in Eddington, and he decides he's going to run for mayor against Ted. So, his two co-officers, Guy and Michael, he enlists them to help him with this campaign, like coming up with slogans, and he stays late at work for this stuff, and then this puts a strain on his relationship with Louise because she did not get informed beforehand. But Joe doesn't like get all mad about that. Like, he does realize his mistake and does try to make it up by planning dinner that night. So at least he kind of realized he kind of abandoned them, and at least he did kind of realize his mistake there. So yeah, like in their first half, Joe's actually a pretty decent, likable lead. Like, is the thing. And also, Joaquin Phoenix does give a good performance as the character. Then Louise and Dawn, and then of course, these two other people named Louise and Dawn arrive, and they've bought a few. Actually, no, that's not two other people. I forgot about this. Actually, no. Louise, like, Dawn is the in-law's name. Louise and Dawn then arrive, and they actually brought her two other characters. There's this radical cult leader named Vernon, and he has two associates of his as well. And at dinner, like, they're discussing, like, pedophile victims speaking out, and the dinner night doesn't really go well, and you kind of know where this kind of goes. And so, like, during this film, like, it doesn't really seem to take a side with whose side you're really supposed to be on, but in the later half, it does kind of get hard for the viewer to care. And the film just feels all over the place. Like, other times it tries to be all social commentary-like, and then it tries to be all suspenseful and scary, and it keeps switching tones, like, so you don't really have the time to really resonate with anything that's really going on. And, like, another thing, this is supposed to be a Western movie. None of this felt Western at all. This did not feel Western. Like, you could call this just a normal movie and you would miss nothing, because this barely felt, yeah, it's set in New Mexico, but this barely felt Western at all. That's the thing. And then, of course, this is where just about all the bad stuff with the film starts at this very scene, because yes, since this is set during 2020, you get a reference to this stuff that also happened that year. In the middle of the film, during Joe's campaign, gets marred by the BLM protesters. You don't need to talk about that, but yeah, it's the BLM protests are going on in New Mexico. And among them are Pedro Pascal's character's son, that you saw earlier, his friend, and Sarah, this girl named Eric and Brian had befriended, and Sarah's trying to make Michael join them because Michael was her ex-boyfriend, but she's unsuccessful. Now, like, Joe wants to turn the election to his favor and use the knowledge of the discussion, and so he makes an announcement. So he decides to make an announcement on a video that Ted had assaulted Louise when she was young, and Louise does not appreciate this, and she leaves with Vernon unannounced. And then she decides to leave with Vernon and the cult and divorce him. And then, of course, he tries calling Louise, and even Dawn tries calling Louise as well, but none of them get through. And then, of course, the next morning, Louise posts a video on Facebook that while she did get assaulted, Ted was not the one who did it, but Joe is still convinced that Ted is guilty, and just to be fair, I don't really blame him for still suspecting Ted at all, because like you see throughout the film, Ted's not really any nicer than Joe is. I mean, this is kind of where Joe does start to kind of fall into the anti-hero lead role, but he's still convinced Ted's guilty, and especially because, like, this next scene right here, Ted's having a re-election party and there's noise complaints going on. When, like, Joe tries making him turn down the music, Ted doesn't listen, and he keeps turning it up anyway. Right there, and, like, clearly does not give a shit about the disturbance he's causing. Right there, so he fails to stop Ted's re-election party. But of course, then the same homeless guy you saw earlier has broken into the bar you saw at the beginning of the film, and still rambles about the awful life. But then Joe decides to silence the man and shoots him dead, and then he dumps his body into a river. And then this is kind of where you see where he's starting to go. And of course, he then goes and he murders Pedro Pascal's character and his son in their home with an assault rifle. And during this like whole scene, Pascal's character is still treating his son like garbage because he sees this girl he was with at the party's purse is there, and he still does not, and he's clearly mad about this. And while he's basically yelling at his son, that's when he gets shot. And to be fair, this was honestly kind of a satisfying death scene. I'm not gonna lie. I thought this scene was pretty satisfying because I hated his character. This character just came off as an asshole in a lot of his scenes. Like it's like this movie wants you to hate Joe more, but to be fair, Joe doesn't really come off as that bad of a lead character kind of until the middle act of the film, and to be fair, the middle act kind of drives into all this stuff. Pascal's character on the other end seems like he just doesn't really care much about that town at all, Eddington at all. Right there, and even treats his son like garbage, even though he's actually following all his rules and stuff. I mean, yeah, his son's not really a much better character either, but still. So it was kind of, so I'm actually kind of glad this character died. Right there, I'm kind of glad Joaquin Phoenix's character killed him. Yeah, and this does bring back all the bad parts of that year, and the misunderstandings, and I mean, the first act was brilliant, but then, of course, it nosedives in the middle act once the protests happen. There's some cool stuff in the finale, but it doesn't save the film. Right there, and like, I'm willing to be patient if the story is like willing to be engaging enough with this kind of stuff, but it just wasn't. It just was not. So, then, of course, Ted and Eric's deaths get discovered the next day, and they become public, and then, of course, you get this other officer of the Pueblo tribe named Butterfly Jimenez, who gets involved in the investigation because their deaths got committed on his land, and so Butterfly reveals that he then found the spent shell and tire tracks in the field, of course, and so Joe wants to draw attention away from him, so he and Guy basically, and this is kind of where Joe becomes kind of the unsympathetic lead. He basically pins all the evidence on Michael as the guy who killed him to save his ass from going to jail. Which, yeah, that's kind of an asshole deed he does do. He doesn't really, this is kind of where he does become somewhat of an asshole. And points out that he has because there's a photo of Sarah kissing Eric in his Instagram DMs, and assault rifle in his car, and a pocket that belongs to Ted, and so Butterfly makes connections, pointing out that Joe's the killer, and so he heads over to his house and interrogates Don. Joe follows him there, but then Antifa extremists show up and they attack the town of Eddington, and they set Michael free, and they set dumpsters on fire. Then Joe and Guy find Michael in the desert. He tries to tell him not to get close, but they ignore his pleas, and so there's an explosive up there that detonates, and it kills Guy and wounds Michael. So, Joe then drives back to Eddington Low, yeah. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is when he basically shot and killed the homeless guy, he kind of got exposed, so he had to go to a testing area, and around the time this is happening, he gets an alert on his phone saying that his results have came in. We never see him open that up, but because he's kind of coughing throughout the rest of the film, and coughing throughout the rest of the sequence, he might as well have got it. He might as well have got it because he's coughing throughout because he does have asthma problems, as we know in the film, and this next scene he's kind of coughing quite a bit. So I wouldn't be surprised if that would have ended up being the case. But we never see him open up that notification. We don't. But he goes back to Eddington, and then he gets targeted by the extremists, and he evades them in the desert and his home. He then goes into a gun store and arms himself with a machine gun. He hazardly fires his weapons, but he accidentally kills Butterfly. And then, a while after the shootout, he does get gunned down and stabbed in the head by one member. But then Brian, one of the kids from earlier, shows up, saves him, and guns the extremist back. And now, as much as I don't like the later half of the film, this is where the bad stuff happens. This and the first act were the reasons why this is not an epic rant. Is because I don't mind the first half of the film, and I did honestly like the sequence. I did actually like the sequence where Joaquin Phoenix's character has a machine gun and he's firing it crazy. Right there, I kind of wish he did shoot some of the members that were attacking the town, but he doesn't really shoot any. He instead actually murders one of the cops instead, but this was a nice sequence. I did the bit with the machine gun was cool, and the scene with where the explosion guy kills the guy and wounds Michael, that was kind of a cool sequence. This was one of the saving graces of the final act. Here, I this wasn't once again, another naked old cult BS that you saw in Ari Aster's first two films, and they don't do any of that. They don't do any that stuff. There's a cult reference, but it doesn't really plague the film as some of Aster's other stuff. right here. It doesn't really try to do that trauma stuff or right here, and it's the trauma stuff like you saw in those films is kind of minor in this one. Right there, but then the scene though, Joe does have a bit of an idiot move when he's out of ammo because he doesn't really try to just, how about just like try whack the member with the butt of the rifle you have? Like bash it in his face, Instead, he gets stabbed in the head before any of that can happen, and then one of the kids saves him, but this kid does get arrested and is interviewed within a year, and that's the thing. That's one of the reasons why this film didn't really make me furious as much as I had predicted, because I thought this film would be epic rant worthy. I thought this was going to be a horseshit worthy film, but there was some interesting stuff. I like where the first act kind of goes. Joe is actually a pretty decent lead character that I feel like the movie tries to force you to hate. I mean, yeah, he does some asshole stuff in the final act, but he doesn't really come off as bad as the movie kind of wants you to view him as. Here, it's kind of I feel like they kind of victimize his character a little bit, and honestly, Pedro's character comes off as worse. In pretty much a lot of his scenes. Maybe that was kind of the point, but this stuff does kind of slightly redeem the final act of the film but even though it still kind of suffers from the bad middle act and stuff, I do kind of wish this machine gun stuff though was in a bit of a better movie. That's what I do wish, but because this was a pretty cool scene. So now we get on with the finale of the movie. So it's been a year later, when a year, obviously it might as well be 2021, when the crazy stuff was ending. Joe surprisingly did not die from his attack. He became the new mayor, but he's unfortunately now paralyzed for life, and he's now wheelchair bound, and he's now being nursed by Dawn in Ted's former house. They now live there. And Louise has now been part of the rallies that are held by the Vernon's cult in Virginia, and now she's pregnant what was supposed to be Joe's child. Michael somehow also survived the bombing, and he does target practice in the outskirts of Eddington. So that's how that's the end of the movie. And it's not necessarily a happy ending, but it's not really entirely a downer ending, because the thing is, this is the first time in an Ari Aster movie where either the lead does not become the bad guy, whereas Midsommar, Flo was kind of the lead character, but she kind of became evil at the end of that movie. Hereditary, I would say, does not count for that trope, because the thing is, the lead still technically died. Yeah, his body didn't die, but the spirit entered his dead body. Yeah, so Peter still died at the end of Hereditary. He may have not... His body may still be there, but it's now hosted by the demon there. Toni Collette's character got her head cut off. Everyone died at the end of Hereditary. Midsommar, everyone died at the end of Midsommar. Flo's character didn't die, but she became evil. She became part of the cult. In a way. Whereas Beau's Afraid, which should have not ended like this, is some weird reason decided we needed more endings, so Beau just basically doesn't grow any backbone, and he got stuck on a boat and he drowned to death because the boat flipped over. And that was honestly that was an even stupider way to end that film. That already awful enough film after we spent 3 hours for nothing. This though actually doesn't really. This is the first time Ari Aster doesn't entirely end one film on a bleak note. There's no twist bullshit at all. They don't do that stuff here. They actually give some kind of triumph, because Joe does become mayor, and the madness in Eddington is kind of ending. There's this new data center that's opening up, and Michael, I don't really get how he survived, because that bombing seemed pretty fatal. To be fair, that seemed like it was a pretty extreme. That seemed like it was a pretty extreme explosive device. So I don't really get how he survived, but he survived and he's doing target practice. But maybe that implies maybe he's gonna kill Joe Or maybe he's going to pull out revenge on Joe or something. Like, maybe that's what it's planning. Maybe that's what it's kind of hinting at. Maybe. But it does somewhat of a different ending. I'll admit, at least it tried to end a bit of a different note. A little bit. So now we get to the good qualities. So, for the good stuff of the film, I liked Joaquin's performance as Joe. I didn't mind Joe as a character, because he did have some likable qualities. He doesn't really become a bad person until, like, the middle act of the movie. There's times I feel the movie just kind of victimizes him a little bit. Because, well... And, well, that's the thing. And I forgot to mention Louise. Like, Louise is barely in the film much. She's in, like, a few scenes, and then after that video, and then she divorces him, and then you see that Facebook video of her. She's not really seen again until the finale. The first half actually does seem like it's going to start off something a little surprising than I expected, but then the bad stuff happens in the middle act of the film. But then the final 30-minute shootout, I thought was actually pretty cool. The bit with the machine gun was pretty cool. And that stuff does slightly redeem this, like... And the one scene I did laugh at, the scene I should have mentioned, like, before we get to the protest stuff, like, one of the fathers does criticize one of his sons who's part of the protest with his line, because even he thinks, though, how he summarized his line was stupid as well, which I'll admit that scene was kind of funny. I'll admit that. That was the one scene that was funny. And the ending, I liked it. Did have some kind of uplifting stuff, and at least the lead did survive the ending. But other than those, does Eddington still suck? Yes, it does. It does not. I'm not saying Eddington's a good film. It was still a bad movie. I just didn't hate it as much as I thought I would. Alright, I just didn't think it was a horseshit film. It was an improvement over Beau's Afraid, and I've seen worse films this year. Like, I've also seen worse A24 films than this, but it was just one of the least annoying on the worst list this year. So in the end, Eddington, yeah, it's still in the void for those who do not want to remember 2020 at all, because it's going to throw you back to all that horrible stuff. And I would only just watch really the last 30 minutes of the movie when the movie hits streaming, but this is still another Ari Aster fail. Anyways, that's it for my rant on Eddington. We're not going to rank Eddington. Here's how I'm going to rank this movie. So overall, unless you need another Ari Aster fail, want to throw back to a horrible year, don't watch this at all, because it's not worth the time at all. And if you're running hungry rank Eddington, I'm going to give Eddington a 4.5 out of 10. Alright, there we go, guys. That wraps up my rant on Eddington. Now, I want to know in the comments down below, for those who did watch Eddington, what you guys saw about the film. Whether you're one of the few people that actually did like this movie, or were just split on it, or really aggressively hated it a little more than I did. And until then, that'll be it for this review. Thank you all for watching. If you like this, want to see more, don't forget to like, subscribe to Don G. Corleone.